What I do want to kind of kick it off with, I'm not sure everybody has heard your story. And I know that this is about a 20th year anniversary of a profound thing in your life. So kind of tell us what led up to that and what that 20-year anniversary is, if you would.
Well, back in the 1980s, Nancy and I were involved in pro-life work. I was on the board of the first crisis pregnancy center in the Pacific Northwest, and then we opened our home to a girl who was pregnant, who had had an abortion in her past, and we didn't know she was pregnant when she came into our home, but it soon became evident, and she went through a process. Nancy helped her actually through the childbirth process, helped her place her child for adoption. And so we had a heart for this. And then in the late 1980s, I was a pastor. Myself and another pastor had been part of the beginning of a church in 1977 in a place called Boring, Oregon. We actually live in Gresham, but the church is in Boring, Oregon. So we thought we could call it Boring Bible Church or Boring, but we didn't. So there was actually a Boring Pastors Fellowship, a group of pastors. So anyway, only in Oregon, I guess, can these things happen. But we had a heart for unborn children, and in the late 1980s, some of you remember that there were some people, including some pastors, standing up in civil disobedience, patterned somewhat after the civil rights movement, to stand in front of abortion clinics for passive resistance, nonviolent civil disobedience, to call attention to the fact that children were dying there every day at these clinics. And I knew that to be true, and the last thing I wanted to do was get involved in that, but I felt God telling me to do it. And it was very complicating. I'm sure some of you were involved in that, a small number of you at least, in your particular part of the country. But in Oregon, it was particularly difficult because of the judicial climate there. The political climate is so incredibly liberal and so pro-choice, anti-life. So started going to these clinics and standing in front of them, doing the peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience. And God did some great things, but they were very hard days, arrested, went to jail. Finally, they came to garnish my wages from the church where I was a pastor because of a civil judgment to an abortion clinic won a judgment against us for we had prevented 20 abortions from happening that day. So 20 times the cost of an abortion plus legal fees they were suing us for. And of course, you recognize, well, you know, lives were saved on those days, and we're grateful. But as a result, because they came to the church to garnish my wages, I had to resign as a pastor. And if you would have asked me back then in 1990, you know, what do you think you're going to be doing 20 years from now, 30 years from now? I would have said, a pastor at Good Shepherd Community Church. And God suddenly changed our plans, and we started Eternal Perspective Ministries. And then, as you were alluding to, Ron, there was a second lawsuit. This was the largest lawsuit largest judgment ever brought against a group of peaceful protesters, and it was a judgment for $8.2 million, which is more money than I made as a pastor in a year. You know, so here we were, and you know, what do we do? Well, we had already resigned. I'd already resigned from the ministry. Already started a new. Resigned from the church, started this new ministry. But we had fortunately already made the decision. There are people over here, so I'll kind of go like this over here. Hi, everybody. So we had already made the decision that we're going to take 100% of my book royalties. I'd already written several books, including Money, Possessions, and Eternity, and some others. And we're going to divest ourselves of those royalties, and any future books that I write, 100% of the royalties will go to support kingdom causes. Not be kept for our ministry to fund our ministry, though that would have been fine, but we just felt God laid on our hearts to give these away to missions work all over the world and to pro-life work. And that's what we did, and that's what we have done ever since. And God in His grace and His kindness has allowed us to live. I mean, technically I can only make minimum wage because anything above that can be garnished, but Nancy has an income that about equals mine in work she's done with the ministry, and the ministry provides each of us a used car to drive, and we're just fine. God takes care of us. Nobody should feel sorry for us, but you know, it's been a privilege to support God's work all over the world. And every time one of those books sells, I feel like, well, I hope somebody gets something from the book. But just knowing that all the royalties are going to God's kingdom, it just makes us feel...
So 100% of the royalties go into the kingdom.
Right.
They don't go to your ministry. They might come through your ministry, but they don't go to your ministry.
That's right. We don't keep any of it.